Hello and welcome back. Now, as you can see, the tiles have dried and they need to be sanded down slightly before I paint them. So this is the messiest part of the job. If you sand them down gently, there won't be too much dust. So here goes. It's basically just to get rid of the rough edges and the bumps and give it a nice smooth feel. I would recommend doing this by hand, because if you do it with a machine, it will be quicker, but then you'll get dust everywhere. And there's not really that much to do. So it's just a light sanding. Now for the first coat, I'm going to paint it with a primer. I'm going to use a brush because a brush gives a better sort of coverage when you've got all these sort of grooves and things. It would be quicker to use a roller, but not as effective. And I'm just going to give it one coat of primer before I add any colour to the bricks. Although I must say, it does look rather nice just like this, but it really ought to be treated a little bit more. Just work the paint into the tiles and make sure you don't miss anything. Get it in between. The white that I'm using with the primer will be the colour of the grout. I don't know what you call it in other countries, but in the UK it's called grout, this part here, and it'll look nice and clean. Now we come to the next and final stage of the tiles. I'm going to paint them, but first of all I'm going to paint in between the tiles with a sort of watered down black paint, which is going to come out sort of slightly greyish. The reason why I'm doing this is because I don't think it looks nice, but it's not very common to see completely white grout between the tiles, and it'll look dirty quite soon if you don't give it some sort of coloration. So to make it a bit more realistic, I paint it grey. You can have a brown colour, but grey is more common. So I'm going to use that colour, plus it'll match the colour that I want to paint the tiles. Here I have the watered down paint solution, a small brush to get in between the tiles, and a cloth. And I'll show you the reason for the cloth afterwards, because this is quite runny, the paint. So first of all, you just put a decent amount on the brush and just brush it on. Try spreading it out so it's not too much. And you do it reasonably quickly, but not so that you make a mess everywhere. Now, the reason why I've got the cloth is because afterwards you want to wipe it down a little bit. It stops any drips, and it stops getting any sort of uneven dark bits, so it stays nice and even. Just very light with the cloth. And then just keep on going and try to do the wall all in one go. Doesn't take very long. Don't worry if you put too much on, because that's what the cloth is for, just to take it away and to even it out a little bit. And if it looks a little bit patchy, that's fine too, because it's supposed to. once you've finished with the wall, with the sort of grouting, and by the way, I forgot to mention, I think I forgot to mention, using a dry cloth, because if you use a wet cloth, you'll just wipe the paint away, but if you use a dry cloth, you'll just sort of soak it up a little bit and it'll be easier to spread. Anyway, now on to the most telling part, the colour. I've decided to go for a greenish colour. I was thinking about sort of cream colour for the tiles, but I thought, you know, to match the kitchen, but I also thought of a greenish colour to match the walls. Now the colour I've chosen is 1 part green, is it a greenish blue for the walls, and 2 parts the colour of the cabinets. I think that would be nice. It will sort of match both, or at least it should. Of course you can change the colour as many times as you like or whatever. It's always best to make a little sample first and then come to the colour you want. This is the colour I've chosen and I hope it goes well. It's a little bit about trial and error, but that's the beauty of painting. I've decided to use a brush with an angle so that you can get into the corners a little better. This bit takes a little bit of patience, but you see the results straight away, so it's quite satisfying. Of course, you find that the colour darkens once it dries, and you'll also find that the more paint you have on the brush, the faster it becomes. So the first tile is probably the slowest. Also a little bit nervous about getting any paint over the edge, which I have just done. So if you do that, just get a damp cloth this time and just gently wipe it away. Hopefully that won't happen too many times. Shouldn't. And if you're worried about getting right to the edge, you can always not quite go to the edge and then come back to that later when you're feeling a bit more comfortable. Now, as you can see, the painting is finished. I think it looks quite nice, but it looks also a little bit new, and I wanted to have a sort of rustic look to match the rest of the kitchen. So I've mixed some brown paint with the water to thin it out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to paint it on top of the stones, on top of the tiles, and then wipe it away with a cloth, and hopefully there'll be some colour left inside these sort of bumps here. I'll zoom in so you can see what I'm talking about. What you do is you mix the paint up with water, then you just brush it on, not too thickly, and then basically do a couple of them at the same time. It just gives it a sort of rustic look. And then just wipe it away with a cloth so that it sort of stays in the holes here. You see there? It gives it a nice rustic look, and maybe a little bit more out there. You don't have to be too pedantic, as long as you're consistent and do them all roughly the same. Don't put too much paint on the brush, otherwise it will drip everywhere, although that's not a massive problem. If you see, it just gets inside the grooves, gives it a nice rustic look, like they could have been done years ago. And of course, if you're not happy with it, the great thing about these tiles is you can wipe it or paint over it and then start again. But of course you don't want to do that too much. Anyway, I'm now going to take the camera back out again and do the whole thing. And it's very quick, this bit. The more you wipe away, the less the contrast. But it's just enough to get into the grooves. You can see the contrast between the bricks, or the tiles I should say, without the dark paint on top and the ones with it. Just gives it a slightly more rustic feel. It's all a matter of taste. If you prefer it to look like that, it's an old kitchen, so it looks like it should have slightly rustic tiles as far as I'm concerned. Now, as you can see, the tiles have got a slightly sort of rustic look about them. The dark paint that I put on top has gone into the grooves to give it that sort of country kitchen kind of look. I rather like it, but of course it's a matter of taste. Now that I've finished the painting, I'm pretty pleased with it. I think it looks nice and rustic. Then it's time to put on the last coat, which is varnish. Now I'm using a very matte varnish. It's just to protect it. Any water that splashes on it and things, it'll be protected. But make sure you're absolutely satisfied with the job you've done before you put the varnish on. Although you can adjust it later. That just means you have to varnish again. So I'm going to start varnishing now, and that won't take long. I'm using a brush. It's a bit less splattering and also better for getting in between the tiles. I would recommend doing this twice. Make sure you catch any drips if you have any, because they don't look very nice afterwards. So keep the brush strokes nice and light. If you see any drips, just take them like that and spread them out. Now, last but not least, silicone. And there you have it, the finished tile splashback made out of joint compound. Thank you very much for watching.